When I think about a painterly style, my mind goes right to the Impressionists, and specifically Mary Cassatt. She is my favorite artist of all time, and one of her paintings, Mother and Child, just happens to be on display in the permanent collection at Wichita Art Museum, which is in the town where I live. So as I've been developing my style of artwork, I've always went to her painting for inspiration, and that's why I wanted to center this video around her art piece, because there is so much we can learn from her work. And think about it. I mean, if you paint a painting in 1890, that's when she created this, and it's still inspiring contemporary artists to this day, then there is something about this piece that should be looked at. First off, you can see that her painting has a lot of loose brushwork, but there are also areas that are very clear and concise. She's planned this out before she ever started working on her painting. The faces of both the mother and child are beautifully rendered. Even the hands are beautifully rendered, but when you zoom out bigger and bigger toward the edges of the painting, the pieces that are not the focal points, you can see there are a lot of rough edges, extremely loose brushwork, and even the foot of the child is so minimally rendered. You can tell it's meant to represent a foot, but it isn't very clear. There are not a lot of details in it. She's such an expert at her skill of Impressionism because she's able to choose what areas in the painting she wants to emphasize by having crisp, clear details, edges that are very defined, line work that's very bold, along with those areas that she doesn't want to emphasize as much. And by doing this, she leads the viewer's eye throughout the painting. I also love how her painting looks different when you look at it close up versus further away. And this is something that all of the Impressionists share in their work. It's because she's using loose brushwork to show the impression of form, light, shadow. This means that she's taken some liberties with creating an approximation of what something looks like. For instance, look at the hand of the child. From a distance, when you're zoomed all the way out, it looks so crisp and clear. But then when you zoom in closer and you look at it only several inches away, it is very blurry. And as a viewer and artist, this is what keeps me coming back to her painting time and time again. The precision with which she was able to apply the paint to make it look blurry close up, but then when you step back 10 feet, how perfectly clear it looks. It looks exactly like a hand. I could go on forever about all the amazing things that she did in this painting, but what I want to do now is transition over to how we can utilize some of these things in our own work to create a more painterly style. The first key takeaway is loose brushwork. If you can figure out a way to apply paint to your painting so that it looks like you didn't really try very hard, you just slopped it on there, but then from a distance, it looks crisp and clear like that hand Mary Cassatt was able to render, and other aspects of her painting as well. If you can do that, your painting is going to look a lot more painterly. People, when they view your painting, they're going to feel something more emotional from it, most likely, than if your painting is very stiff, all the edges are crisp, everything is very detailed. And over the years, I've experimented a lot with trying to create loose brushwork in Mary Cassatt style. And one of the things I've figured out is just to use bigger brushes, and use brushes that are kind of frayed out, like this one. It works really well because you don't have as much control if you use a bigger brush or a frayed out brush to apply paint. Another thing that you can do is use a palette knife to apply paint. It's very easy to just scrape on paint to your painting, and of course it's going to go on there in a very loose, abstract way because you don't have as much control with a thick area on a palette knife as you do a really small brush. One of the things that I like to do whenever I'm painting is try to paint quickly, because I've noticed that if I speed up my painting, I am painting more loosely just in general because I'm trying to get the painting done quicker. I also try to focus on working on the entire painting at once rather than one small area. When I do this, I notice that I'm making bigger, bolder brush strokes. I'm working in a more loose way. The next key takeaway from Mary Cassatt's painting are her edges. Some are very undefined, while others are so crisp and clear, and she decides where to put these throughout her piece. I don't think it's haphazard. I mean, maybe she's painting some of it just in the moment, obviously, but she was such an expert at this. I think she was studying and planning out where she was going to put these edges, and that's what I like to do. I paint mostly animal portraits in bright colors. I make other works as well. But with my animal paintings, I like to have the crisp edges near my focal points. And in an animal portrait, the focal point is almost always the eyes, the nose, the muzzle, the mouth, maybe if the tongue is hanging out, the tongue, but it's all centered around the face. But with your work, the focal points might be different than mine. So this is something to ask yourself. Where do you want the viewer to look first when they see your painting? And then where do you want them to look second and third? Because as an artist with a painterly style, you have the ability to lead the viewer's eye through the painting just like Mary Cassatt did. So if you pick out a certain focal point, make a bold color choice there, have crisp lines, crisp details in that area. And then the areas of the painting that you don't want the viewer to see first, but eventually they will start to focus on it. Their eye will float around your work. This is how we view things. We don't just see the whole thing all at once. Oftentimes we see one area and then we go on to the next one, and then we may view out to see the general idea of it. But oftentimes we're looking at focal points. And so try to pick those areas of focal points that you want the viewer to see, to have very crisp lines and details. And then blurry areas in the places that you want to be secondary for the viewer. Another thing we can learn from Mary Cassatt's painting is to embrace imperfection. I know a lot of us, when we try to make our work, we want it to look so perfect. And we're tempted to overwork areas within our paintings because we want that perfection. We want it to look exactly like the photo reference that we're using, or perhaps the subject of our painting, whatever it is. We want it to be perfectly rendered. But unless you're making hyper-realistic paintings where your goal is to have everything perfectly rendered, where it feels as though it's the exact same thing as a photograph and the viewer cannot tell the difference between your painting and a photograph, unless that's your goal, then it's likely your painting's never going to look perfect. And this is why I love making artwork with a painterly style, more like the Impressionists did, because you can embrace imperfection, and that can help tell a narrative and a story within your work as well. I mean, Mary Cassatt did this, right? I look at the brushwork throughout all of her painting, and it is obvious that she was willing to embrace imperfection, because if she wasn't, she wouldn't have made some of these really bold brushstrokes. She also used bold colors. When you look at the red, how bold it is, there's areas of completely saturated red right in the ear of that mother. There's also bold red in the dress, in the neck area, and it makes the whole painting pop. Mary Cassatt was fearless. I mean, not only did she paint in a style that was quite avant-garde for her time, she also was a woman, a female making paintings. And this was definitely not the status quo of artists in her time period. So because of all this, to be able to paint with such freedom, it is an admirable thing. And so I always go back to her painting time and time again for inspiration for my own work. Although I don't paint mothers with children, I don't even use naturalistic colors in most of my paintings. I love the way that she applies the paint. All of that said, I wanted to do this video because I found this painting to be one of my best teachers in helping me become a better artist, and I hope it helps you as well. If you'd like more acrylic painting tips, I have a playlist. You can check it out here. All right, thank you so much for watching. See you next time.